2,000 years ago, in a small town called Nazareth, a carpenter's son grew up watching his father work with wood, stone, and rope not because it was a hobby, but because survival depended on it. There was no minimum wage, no banks, no credit cards, just coins, grain, debt, and an empire squeezing every last denarius out of the people at the bottom. This is the real economy of the time of Jesus, and once you understand how it worked, you'll never read the Gospels the same way again. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why a coin, a debt, and a tax collector show up in almost every parable Jesus ever told. Land, farming, and the 90%. Let's start with the basics. Who had money and who didn't? In first century Judea and Galilee, roughly 90% of the population were peasant farmers, fishermen, or laborers. Most people didn't own the land they worked. Land was controlled by a small elite wealthy landowners, the Herodian royal family, and the Roman state itself. Here's how farming actually worked. A peasant family would farm a plot of land, but a huge chunk of what they grew, often a third or more, went straight to the landowner as rent. Then came Roman taxes. Then came local taxes for Herod Antipas, or whichever ruler controlled the region. Then, if you were Jewish, there was the temple tax on top of that. By the time all these layers took their cut, many families were left with barely enough grain to survive the year. This is exactly why debt was everywhere. Farmers would borrow seed or money from wealthier landowners just to get through a bad harvest, and if they couldn't repay it, they could lose their land entirely or even be forced into debt slavery. This is not background trivia. This is the exact economic world Jesus was born into and preaching to. Think about the parable of the unforgiving servant, who owed 10,000 talents, an absurdly massive, impossible debt. Audiences at the time didn't need it explained. They lived under crushing debt. It was the defining fear of their daily lives. Coins, trade, and the tax collector problem. Now let's talk about money itself, because coins in this era told a political story. The main currencies circulating were the Roman denarius, a silver coin roughly equal to a day's wage for a laborer, and various local bronze coins minted by regional rulers like Herod. Every coin that came from Rome had the emperor's face stamped on it, often with inscriptions calling him Son of God or Divine. This is why the famous question, "Should we pay taxes to Caesar?" was loaded with danger. Answer, yes, and you look like you're endorsing an emperor who claims divinity. Answer no, and you're inciting rebellion against Rome. When Jesus asked for a coin and said, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's," he was navigating one of the most politically explosive economic debates of his day. And taxes weren't collected gently. Rome outsourced tax collection to local agents, the infamous tax collectors, or publicans. These men would bid for the right to collect taxes in a region, pay Rome a fixed amount up front, and then were free to collect as much extra as they could squeeze from the population, legally pocketing the difference. This is why tax collectors were despised as traitors and thieves working for the occupying empire against their own people. It's also why it was so radically shocking that Jesus ate dinner with them. In an honor-based society obsessed with social status, sitting at the table with a tax collector was as scandalous as it gets. Meanwhile, trade was booming along the major routes connecting Galilee to the Mediterranean world. Olive oil, wine, dried fish from the Sea of Galilee, wool, and pottery moved along roads and sea lanes built and maintained by Rome for military and economic control. Fishing, in particular, wasn't a peaceful hobby. It was a regulated, taxed industry, which is exactly why Peter, Andrew, James, and John leaving their nets to follow Jesus meant walking away from actual licensed businesses. The temple, religion's economic engine. Here's something most people miss. The Jerusalem temple wasn't just a religious center. It was one of the largest economic institutions in the region. Pilgrims from across the empire traveled to Jerusalem, especially during Passover, bringing foreign currency that couldn't be used to pay the temple tax, which had to be paid in a specific approved coinage. This created an entire industry of money changers who converted foreign coins into temple-approved currency for a fee. Then there were animal sellers, providing sacrificial animals for pilgrims who couldn't bring their own livestock hundreds of miles, again for a price. This is the exact economic system Jesus disrupted when he flipped the tables in the temple courts. He wasn't just angry about noise or disrespect. He was confronting a system where access to worship had become tangled up with profit, fees, and a marketplace built inside a sacred space. Understanding this turns cleansing of the temple from a vague act of anger into a direct, calculated economic and political statement. Conclusion. So when you zoom out, the world of Jesus wasn't some peaceful, simple, ancient backdrop. It was a tense, layered economy of empire taxes, local rulers taking their cut, crushing peasant debt, a temple tangled up in currency exchange, and a population squeezed from every direction. Every coin mentioned in the Gospels, every debt forgiven, every tax collector who shows up at dinner, none of it is random. It's Jesus speaking directly into the exact economic pain his audience woke up with every single day. Once you see the economy behind the story hits completely differently. If you, until now, hit that like button, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.